be participants among this first of a group of series that we will have with other communities, with just conversing with the police chief and other elected officials about how we can improve community relations with the police and law enforcement in general. So with that, we just want to go over some brief etiquette reminders for this evening's event. Please make sure that you have yourself muted. Unless you're speaking, of course, we will have time for a question and answer segment. Once the predetermined questions have been asked to the panelists, we will open everything up for anyone who may have a general question to ask to the police chief or Kevin Hertel once he joins us. We also ask that you use the raise your hand function so that you can be placed into queue. And with that, the group chat is open. So if you want to participate and just have discussion with other members of the audience, feel free to utilize the group chat. That will allow you to remain engaged throughout the program, while also respecting the other attendees and speakers that are online this evening. So without further ado, I want to go into a brief overview of everything that we'll be covering tonight. Of course, we just did the welcome, but I will introduce everyone that we have as panelists and then also the co-host. With the question and answer segment, we have about 18 pre-screened questions that we're going to be asking as the host for this evening, and we are going to be covering the changes that the chief and Kevin Hertel, our state rep, has had to enforce in the midst of COVID. We're also going to go over some of the training and professional development that's offered to the officers, police budget, diversity, equality, and we're also going to discuss inclusion practices as far as community and diversity goes. And from there, we'll look into different tactics, and we will then introduce the audience. And so, DeVry, I don't know if you know how much longer the...
He's joining now. We just finished another conversation with local high school students. Okay. He'll be on in just a second.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll just leave it here then, so everyone that's going to be joining us has the opportunity to just review everything, and then as soon as you give me word that he's here, we will go ahead and introduce the panel and get everything started this evening.
Lawanda?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Where is the raise your hand button? I don't see it.
Are you on a cell phone? Or
no.
You're on your
I'm
computer?
on my computer.
At the very bottom of the screen, you should see a strip that
yes.
allows you to mute yourself, and the same panel at the bottom of the screen. And then from there, let's see here. You should be able to see reactions. Let's see.
I have participants, chat, share screen, record, and reactions.
Yeah, if you go into participants, you'll see raising your hand at the bottom of it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Because I'm actually working two different screens here, so I appreciate that, Stephen.
Also, for anybody who wants to change their screen name, there's three little buttons in your own separate window. You see your face on the screen. If you go to the top right corner, there's three buttons, and you can change your name. You can turn off your video there also.
Okay, it looks like we have Kevin. Do we have Kevin? I know I just seen him and admitted him.
Hi, Lawanda. I just made it. I apologize for.
No, that's okay. That is quite all right. Thank you for joining us this evening. Again, everyone, we are live streaming this event on Facebook, and we are recording this evening as well. So if you have anyone that you know who wish to have seen everything or participated, they are able to go back and view things online. On the NAACP's website, we will insert a link in the chat that allows them to go on and review it. But I just covered the course of events that we're hoping to go over this evening. And so with that, I do want to just go ahead and jump right in and introduce the panel. Again, this is the first of a series of discussions that we're hoping to have with other communities. And tonight we have joining us with St. Clair Shores Police, Chief Woodcox, Todd Woodcox. We also have St. Clair Shores and East Point State Representative Kevin Hertel. And the host for this evening is myself. I'm Lawanda Turner, for those of you who do not know me. I am a St. Clair Shores resident and former candidate for St. Clair Shores City Council. I hold my BA in Business and Social Science from Marygrove College. I'm also an alumna of Macomb Community College, where I studied paralegal studies and business administration, as well as a whole host of other certifications that I have. We have as a panelist and a organizer for this event, Evan Hazlett. He is a St. Clair Shores resident. He was very instrumental over the summer in assisting with the different protests that were organized, and they were very successful protests. He worked very closely with the chief. He is joining us from Chicago this evening. He is a student at DePaul University. He's studying hospitality and event planning. And then we have the newly graduated U of M alum at this point, Jaylen Bradley. He is a resident of St. Clair Shores as well. He sits on the NAACP Youth and Young Adult Harper Woods Grosse Pointe chapter of the youth and young adults. So with that, he will be possibly going over how you can get involved in their organization. But without further ado, I want to get into the question segment so that we are able to make sure we have enough time for those in the audience who have questions. So to get everyone familiar with the speakers, I want to relinquish the floor over to our chief, and we will just ask if you could give us a brief overview of your job duties and how they may have changed since COVID and the other political upset that we have seen across the country.
Well, thank you. And yes, my name is Todd Woodcox. I am the Chief of Police for the City of St. Clair Shores. And my job as the chief is basically the big picture guy, looking out over the whole scenario, the big picture of what's going on with the police department. I don't get to go out on the road anymore. I don't get to be a police officer anymore. I wear the uniform, but the last time I actually did police work, it's been quite some time. I oversee the budget, oversee hiring, oversee training. Granted, there are other people involved in that whole process, but it's all under my umbrella. And when things go well, the people I work with did a great job. When things go poorly, it's my fault. I've been doing police work now in the city of St. Clair Shores for 28 years, and I've been the chief for the last 6 of them.
Awesome, great, thank you so much. Kevin, it would be the same question for you. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. If you could please give a brief introduction of yourself and your roles and responsibilities as our state rep and how they may have changed in light of the pandemic and other cultural and political events that have happened.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Lawanda, for putting this together. You know, I think it's incredibly important that as a community, we have conversations about a multitude of issues across that we're seeing across our community. In fact, I just got off a phone call with students from South Lake, Lakeshore, and East Point Public Schools discussing some of the issues across our communities and how I can work to help them change those for the better. I want to thank the police chief. Chief Woodcox, I've always appreciated your openness to working with citizens and listening to issues and trying to find solutions. And that's what my role is as well, is working with our residents to try to find solutions at state level issues. And so, I try to be as open and transparent to residents of the community by holding coffee hours and, sharing my cell phone widely and engaging in social media, but making sure that I'm listening to folks in our community and taking that message to Lansing to try to pass legislation that will better lives across our community. I think that's the most important thing. COVID has changed a lot across all of our lives. And hopefully now with the vaccine that left Portage, Michigan over the weekend and has been distributed all over the country from Pfizer, we are at the beginning of getting back to normal. It's going to take some time and we still have a long process to go through, but I was not only proud to see that come from Michigan and see folks working together, not only from the medical community, political community, and also the business community to make sure that we're doing our best to get that vaccine to as many people as quickly as possible. But it's changed the way we work in the legislature as well. Safety is a #1 concern. I, from the beginning of this pandemic, have said that we should have the ability to meet remotely as a legislature because there are things that we need to pass to benefit the people of our state, whether it's resources for folks who have been financially impacted by this virus, business owners that have been impacted by this virus, and making sure that our medical community has the resources that they need to treat folks who have been infected by the virus. And so last week we saw a perfect example of how things have changed in the Michigan House. Because we do not meet virtually, our leadership has said that's not a possibility. Last week we canceled an entire week of session because there were positive tests of House members and staff. And so that meant the work of the people had to stop because we didn't utilize technology to do our job in a very important way. And so we'll continue to push for that. I think it's important. We've given access to city councils and school boards, county commissions across the state to meet virtually during this pandemic. I think the House and Senate should be doing the same things. But we have been in session throughout the pandemic trying to make sure we're doing our best to provide that resource. Now, I've had a lot of disagreements with leadership on the seriousness that they've taken this pandemic and the resources that we provided to folks across the state. And I think we have a lot that we need to do to improve on that. And I'll continue to push every single day to make sure we do that. But look, there's, in roles like this, you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to look at multiple issues at one time, work on those and get them done because that's what the people deserve. That's what we were sent there to do. And so I will continue that work to the best of my ability. And I appreciate everybody that's on the call tonight. And I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome, thank you. So I do want to allow our other hosts to participate in this evening's discussion. I'm going to relinquish the floor to Jaylen Bradley, and he is going to follow up with a few questions for the chief and our state rep.
Thank you, Lawanda, and hello, everyone. Good evening. At this point of the program, we want to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. So my questions will come as follows. So Chief Woodcox, thank you again for coming this evening to speak with us all. I have a question, though, in regards to the demographic makeup of St. Clair Shores Police Department. Would you mind telling us the demographics such as the race, the gender, or the sex, and the years of experience that our officers are within?
Well, the years of experience that ranges across the board from, I'm the old guy in the house, 28 years, getting a little long in the tooth, to some new officers we just hired this spring, even in the midst of a pandemic, we still had to hire. As far as race goes, unfortunately, we're a bunch of white people. That's where we're at there. And we'll get into discussions later on with other questions about how that came to be and what we can do to fix that. And then as far as gender goes, it's about 10% female, 90% male.
Sounds good. Thank you for sharing that. I do have a follow-up to those demographics at this time. I'm curious to know, what challenges have you seen with the demographic makeup of the St. Clair Shores Police Department?
Biggest challenges I have is getting people that want to come work with us that don't look like me. When I became chief, the first job offer I put out there, and we'll get into how we choose who I can offer a job to. It happened to be to a black female, a Detroit police officer looking to make the change over to our place. That was the very first person I offered a job to, looking forward to having her, and she eventually turned us down before she made the move. Most recent job offer I offered, it was for a clerical position, but trying to steal someone from the courthouse and want them to come over to our place. Happened to be a black female also. She had applied, passed interview, was awesome. All excited to get her to come in, and last minute she pulled out also. When it comes to hiring, we're bound by Act 78, which is very strict regulations on applications, testing, interview. And when I go and I sit in on all the tests, I don't participate at all. We don't write the test, but I like to meet all the candidates when they show up for the test. And unfortunately, it's almost all a bunch of white guys. And I mean, you look across the room, and that's just to take the test. I can't hire them if they don't show up. So we've got to work as a community on getting a more diverse group to even apply and show up for the tests. But like I said, we're going to get into more of that in the questions coming up regarding how people actually become police officers in St. Clair Shores and some of the challenges. But the biggest challenge I have is getting people that want to come work with us that don't look like me.
So just for clarification purposes, what I'm hearing is the police department makeup is majority Caucasian or white identified police officers in the department. And there is no people of color, African-American identified individuals in the department?
No, when I hired on 28 years ago, one of the guys that hired on swore in right next to me. He was African-American, but he left us about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And he was the first and only one in St. Clair Shores.
Okay, sounds good. I'm curious to know, you touched on it with the Act 78 regulations that's kind of tying you down to the way in which you go about recruiting and maintaining staffers in the department. But I really want to know more about those strategies. Where are you exactly looking at to recruit officers? And what does that timeline look like? Is it a certain part of the year that's like a big hiring fair, or is this something all year round that we must approach?
Well, this is going to need some background information. Way back in the day when I started, a lot of agencies were hiring people and sponsoring them to go through the police academy. And that really went by the wayside, because back when I was hiring in, I tested with over 600 candidates for the city of St. Clair Shores. Now we're excited if we get a dozen. 2 dozen is amazing. So departments have realized they don't have to pay people wages and benefits and their academy time to put them through the academy. So a lot of agencies, St. Clair Shores is one of them, has stopped putting people through police academies, hiring before the academy. So one of the challenges I face is I can only hire officers that are certified through other agencies or put themselves through the academy. And a lot of people that want to get into this line of work that can be great candidates, they can't afford to quit their jobs. I've seen guys try to do it, try to have a full-time job and go to the academy. You're killing yourself. You can't do it. And there aren't that many people that can afford to quit their job, spend, I think now it's 17 weeks in a police academy in hopes of getting hired somewhere. So that's the biggest job. The pool of candidates is so small. It's people that can only afford to get themselves through or find another agency to put them through, and then I try to steal them.
Absolutely.
But,
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
X78's an interesting thing. It had great intentions back when it was enacted back in, oh my goodness, I think it was the 50s. And that dictates taking a test, interviewing, having a set list that I have to hire from. Like, Jaylen, you could come and you could show me a resume that's going to knock my socks off. But if you didn't jump through all those hoops, I can't hire you.
Absolutely.
And that's a shame. The X78 was supposed to prevent people from just hiring their buddies, but now it's gotten to the point where it's handcuffing us from hiring good people. I'd love to be able to hire someone and put them through the academy. Can't do it. That's the issue I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah.
And
I,
Jaylen, just if I can chime in real quick.
yes, please. Thank you.
And good to see you, Jaylen. Congratulations on graduating. I won't hold it against you that it was U of M. You know, what I hear from Chief Woodcox is not, I mean, this is something, if you talk to police chiefs, you know, I work with the police chief in East Point in our district. Grosse Pointe Shores is a portion of our district. And other police chiefs across the state when we work on legislative issues that they get involved in. And this is something I hear from all of them, right? That their pool of candidates is smaller than they've ever seen. And the qualifications that somebody has to meet in order for them to hire them, it's difficult. You know, it's not only policing we're seeing this across, it's our firefighting, it's teachers, it's jobs that were at one point really well, from my perspective, these are jobs that are extremely important to our community, but jobs that at one point were sought after and folks saw a huge benefit to them and went into them because of things that we've done. And when I say we, I mean governmental institutions have done around pension cuts, salary cuts, benefit cuts, things like that. It's made these some of these jobs you know, less desirable for some to go into. I think it's hurt you know, the pool of candidates that we could possibly have, and we as government institutions need to start looking at how do we attract more people into these career fields because they're so important to our community. And you're right, diversity is extremely important. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to attract a diverse talent pool to these jobs. But it's a problem across the entire state.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Representative Hertel. You're absolutely right. This is a conversation that we have been hearing across all the different communities over here in Grosse Pointe, Harper Woods, East Point, and of course, St. Clair Shores. However, I think we do need to look at what is exactly are the qualifications in St. Clair Shores as far as hiring staffers that are people of color. A little context, for example, is this true that the city uses like a IMCO test, something that almost lessens the applicant pool even more? Can you tell us about that, Chief Woodcox?
Yeah, that's a company that is known statewide for police testing, not just new hires, but promotional exams. As a matter of fact, we've just scheduled it with them, some promotional examinations coming up. But we don't use them for our entrance exam. A lot of agencies do. We don't use them for the entrance exam. It was about maybe 7-8 years ago. The city manager at that time decided to contract the test out by mail to a company out in California. But it is a very difficult test. It's nothing you can prepare for. It is nothing you can study for. It's a general knowledge test, and the failure rate on that, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is pretty high. We lose easily 1/3 to 1/2 of our candidates on that test.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that is honestly a thing that I guess we have to look at more closely, because we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves out there in the community, you know, making sure that folks know this is a place that we are offering all folks of color and identities to possibly join the force. And you have some departments that offer pathway programs. You know, they go into the schools, they really show what is the ideal public servant in the police department looks like, for folks to just get an exposure to what the occupation may entail. Because, you know, in the climate that we have just left in 2020 and even before then, there's just a very huge challenge when it comes to trust. And I highly believe that you really have to trust a department, you have to trust the occupation to really want to join in on that certain initiative. So my question to you, Chief Woodcox, is going forward, how can we build that trust so that people of color and other applicants know that though we do not have the diversity at this moment, we're working towards it, and we really want to make sure we get your application in?
Well, this job is all about relationships, and it's reaching the youth. And I've gone, this was going back years ago, I started meeting with students from South Lake High School, engaging with them a little bit. This was back when the Black Lives Matter movement was just beginning, or beginning to get nationwide coverage. And I met with them, engaged them, discussed what we actually do as a police department, trying to build those relationships. We have a police officer assigned to each of the 3 school districts in St. Clair Shores. So they're always out there engaging with the kids. Was just playing kickball this summer, or I'm sorry, not this summer, this October, with a group of kids from the Lakeview district. And it's all about relationships and engaging with the community. There's nothing good can come from the police officers out on the road, just staying in that cage we call a police car and not getting out and engaging the community. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And at this time, I want to transition to the next set of questions regarding police training. So as we have heard through our conversation so far, there is a predominantly Caucasian or white police department. And with that brings the challenges that we already addressed. So the question comes to, what does police training looks like so that we can take forth an effort of recognizing the diversity of our community here in St. Clair Shores?
Well, training in racial issues and implicit bias is nothing new to the St. Clair Shores Police Department. We have been doing this for many, many years, and we're very blessed to have Reverend James Friedman as our chaplain, who is an exceptional speaker, exceptional trainer, happens to be African American, also happens to be a reserve police officer with East Point and New Baltimore. So it's not just some stranger coming in and trying to tell us things. It's someone we know, someone we trust, and someone that has lived the life of an African American man and has dealt with those issues, but is also able to see it from our side and see the things that we deal with and really blend the two. And it's been really beneficial. We've done that annually, except 2 years ago, we ended up skipping 1 year because there was some active shooter training we had to get in. But we had that training scheduled for the spring. COVID shut it down. I'm pleased to announce, with the relaxation of some of the guidelines that we have to live under, we were able to get that training back in this past Friday. And it's not just watching a video, it's getting Reverend Friedman in the building, talking with him face to face, bouncing those questions back and forth. And it's a few hours that our officers are there engaging with him. And he's going to do another section with other officers coming up next week.
So just for clarification purposes, Chief Woodcox, what I'm hearing is there is an African American identified male who's a reverend that comes, and you all kind of have I kind of see it as a Q&A session with that individual. Is there anyone else besides that one person that can kind of join in on that conversation?
Well, it starts out as a presentation, and he presents his material, but then yes, there is a Q&A. He does have a formal presentation that he does in his training, but then obviously it ends up as a Q&A. And he's always popping in the station. I shouldn't say always, he does it a lot less. He's got a lot of irons in the fire, but occasionally he'll pop in and just engage with the officers. And he always ends up talking about the issues that we're having, whether it's hiring and racial issues. And he's just a great resource to have around. But as far as I can remember, we have not invited anybody else into those trainings, but I'd be open to the opportunity to have other voices being heard.
Absolutely. Thank you for stating that, because I think that will be really, really important. We can't just have one African American identified person to tell the experiences of every last, lived African American. So I really do see the importance of having a collection of individuals for sure. But I'm really glad to hear that there is some type of initiatives with police training to address implicit and explicit bias. But, you know, in the community right now, we're having a lot of talk about how this training that's sometimes done is sporadic. It's not always filled with accountability. It's one of those things that individuals and departments do just to check off a box. So I'm curious to know, what is it that you all are implementing to make sure that folks are actually leaving out with something valuable from that training, and that you're holding them accountable for any instance that they may encounter?
Well, that was a really big question. It's got a lot of different facets to it. As far as the training, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We can force them into the training. We can make them go through the training. If they want to close off their ears to the training, shame on them, but that's going to end up showing in their attitudes and behaviors going forward on the road. So we track everything the officers do, and we review every use of force that ever happens in the agency. It goes from the officer that had to use the force, reviewed by his supervisor's supervisor, my deputy chief, and then finally me. It goes through several layers of review. And then at the end of the year, obviously if we see a problem earlier, we'll address it. But at the end of the year, the deputy chief does a comprehensive review of all the use of force reports throughout the year to just double check, make sure we don't have any red flags where we've got somebody out there that is ending up using force more often than they should. Usually that's going to be the officer's fault. It's not going to be that they always run into the jerk that wants to fight them. It's usually the officer that didn't have the skills and talents or the will to engage someone and to de-escalate and bring things down to a level where force wasn't needed. So there is a multi-layer review of the officer's work product after the training. Can't force them to listen, can't force them to engage, but I sure can review what they do with that afterwards.
Thank you, Chief Woodcox. Representative Hertel, I want to bring you into the conversation. I'm curious to know what has been the conversations in state legislature about having mandatory implicit and explicit bias. What is the future of police training looking like?
Yeah, so that's been a conversation that's been ongoing, and unfortunately, it hasn't risen to the level that I think of the attention that it deserves. The Michigan House did pass legislation to require implicit bias training in the state of Michigan. But we have so many other issues that need to be worked on and addressed. And what I have done as part of my caucus in the State House, the House Democratic Caucus that I serve in, the Michigan Legislative Black Caucus is very active. And so folks that don't know, that is from across the state of Michigan, that is all the African-American legislators come together and predominantly are working on issues that they feel must be addressed within their community. But really this year, because of what we've seen of the issues across our country, many have looked to them to understand what are the policies that we really need to be working on to move these issues forward. And really, this is not just a Black community issue. This is an issue that we need to look at across not only our community and across the state, but across the entire country. And so I'm glad to see these conversations happening at a larger level. I think that they deserve much more attention. There are many things that we could be doing as a state to make sure we're addressing systemic racism. It is seen across not only policing issues that the chief has discussed, but in our education system and access to housing and wealth attainment and employment. There are so many different things that we could be working on that would tackle systemic racism across our society. And I've been a huge advocate working on these issues. If you attend some of my coffee hours, we had a lot of conversations about these issues, really to hear from folks in the community. I'll be very clear. I am a Caucasian man, right? I have not walked in the shoes of many who are being impacted by systemic racism, but I listen to the stories that they tell, the mothers that are worried as their children leave the house for the day, and if they're going to come into a situation that are they properly prepared to deal with what they might face. And I don't have to, I'll be very honest, I don't have to have that conversation. My oldest son's only 3, and I have an 8-month-old, but I don't have to have that conversation with my children. But that doesn't mean that I don't have to work on policies that make it so that nobody has to have those conversations with their children. And so, I look to those who I trust on these issues, who have lived it, who have experienced it, and try to find ways to move the issues forward. I will say police training is one aspect. Like I said, we worked on implicit bias training in the Michigan House. But unfortunately, in these circumstances, what we see is we pass one bill to make it look like we're doing something, look like there's an accomplishment, and then we move on. I've been very clear that these are not issues that we should move on from. These are issues that we should work on and discuss. And Jabri in my office, who's on this call, has been very active in working with me on issues that he feels are very important. And we're sad to see Jabri leave. He's actually going to go work for the Detroit Action Network and do incredible work there, which I think is extremely important. And Jabri will still be a resource in my office. But it's been a difficult year because of the pandemic for folks to focus on other things that need to be worked on. Like I said in the beginning, we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to work on all of the issues that are important to people across the state of Michigan. That includes the pandemic, that includes racial inequality issues across our communities, that includes our schools, making sure they have the resources they need. So we have to be able to focus on all of these things, because if we don't do something about it, things aren't going to change for the better. And I'm committed to working with folks on this call and anybody. I'm always open to talking about these issues and doing all I can to make sure they're getting the proper voice in Lansing.
Thank you, State Representative Hertel. Thank you for that. At this time, I want to transition to our next topic for discussion that will be led by the next host, Evan, about the police budget. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So over the course of 2020, the conversation surrounding abolishing, defunding, and the reallocation of police budgets across the US has grown into a worldwide movement. We have seen demonstrations across the world crying out for new forms of community safety and looking critically at how our communities are protecting ourselves and how we are funding those methods of protection. So I'd like to ask a few questions to the chief about our police budget. I did drop in the chat a link because the St. Clair Shores 2020-2021 budget is publicly available. You are able to do as much research as you would like, but there were a couple things that I was a little unclear about, so I wanted to ask a little bit more. I am going to share my screen so we can look at one thing in particular. So if you'll just give me a quick moment to do so. Okay, so the first question that I have for the chief is, could you please describe what the Drug Law Enforcement Fund is in general, and how these revenues and expenditures are made up, including what a forfeiture fund is, if people are not aware?
Yep, absolutely. In a nutshell, drug forfeiture funds, those are funds that come into the city of St. Clair Shores due to narcotics investigation, where where property or cash has been seized and it's been related to and shown to be products of the drug trade, where someone is using drug money to buy their cars and their home, and or major stacks of cash without any justification, no real job, no inheritance, but they get arrested for dealing in narcotics. We end up seizing that property, and then we can use that for law enforcement purposes going forward. The book that deals with what we can and cannot use that funding for is relatively thick, but to summarize it the best that I can, it can be used for virtually any law enforcement need. However, it cannot supplant something that's already in the city budgets. So suppose we had a windfall seizure of $100,000. We can't put that into, say, the motor pool budget to pay for our police cars and then take $100,000 out and then put that to Parks and Rec. That's supplanting money that's always budgeted, always used. So if there is something in our budget that has traditionally been paid for routinely with city tax dollars, we cannot turn around and spend drug forfeiture funds on that. So what we end up doing with the drug forfeiture funds is that's how we pay for all our cell phones for all our detectives and the command staff. That's how we fund our canine division above and beyond any donations that we get. That's how we fund our narcotics vehicles, our detective vehicles, our SWAT team, all covered by narcotics forfeiture funds. In a nutshell, that's how it works.
Thank you for that. On a similar note, while we are on the subject, there has been a push for the decriminalization of small level possession charges. I was curious what your perspective on how St. Clair Shores policing would change. For reference, there was an initiative in Oregon that was passed in this past election in November, and the movement is growing. I am a part of an organization, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And so through this organization and through many research that you can do, many of our drug laws are rooted in very racist and audibly absurd statistics and information. And so there is a large movement growing across the world of drug policy activists that are pushing for the decriminalization of small level drug charges, because people should view this as a health crisis instead of a criminalization crisis. And so I was wondering how you would view policing to change with these different initiatives popping up. I do know that there is a large initiative in Michigan growing to decriminalize low-level drug possession charges. And so how would this affect policing in St. Clair Shores? And is the police department taking any steps to prepare for what seems to be the inevitable happening in coming years?
Well, there's a lot of ifs in that one regarding if there's some low-level drug charges that are decriminalized. We've already seen the change in the attitude and the law regarding marijuana in the state. It's hard to say exactly what changes we would need to make, because I understand the marijuana law changes, and I would have a hard time supporting drugs like heroin, cocaine, illegal trafficking of legal drugs like Oxycontin. I'd have a hard time decriminalizing those as far as supporting that. It's not up to me whether they get decriminalized, of course. But what we've already seen with the marijuana being decriminalized, we get so many complaints from neighbors saying my house, I can't even open up my windows in the summertime because my neighbor's got all this weed growing. Well, nothing we can do about it. And that's just weed, and that's in the neighborhoods. And part of the push for this total legalization was, well, we don't want to grow it in the neighborhood, so we'll start selling licenses and people will start doing it as a business. Well, unfortunately, yeah, now people can do it as a business and grow it in their basement. So I think Representative Hertel and his colleagues could do a lot of good for the community by taking a good hard look at whether we should allow people to be growing and packaging marijuana in their own homes. I'd hate to see that something that they decide to go with, say, heroin or small amounts of cocaine. I'd hate to see that come into our neighborhoods because now it's okay.
So as of now, the police department is taking no steps to prepare for these initiatives that are sparking around the country, to clarify.
It's hard to take steps to prepare for something that that I haven't seen. It's like asking Representative Hertel, how are you going to vote on this proposed legislation when he hasn't even seen it? If you give me a specific guideline that you expect to be passed, I'd be happy to take a look at it and give you my take on it. But right now, without seeing exactly the wording, it's hard for me to take a stand either way or prepare for it.
Cool. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again to find my notes. Okay. And then you did briefly mention it, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit further on how the drug forfeiture funds have been used in the past 3 years. There was a significant amount, I believe, in 2019, according to the reference we brought up.
Yep, what we used, so the major amount of drug forfeiture funds recently, we had a full garage build out and property room build out. It was pretty sad, what we call a sally port, where we bring prisoners in and out. Back when I was working the road, we get a prisoner out of the car and it's right next to the shovel and the rake and the salt and it looked like my garage. It was literally a garage. It was not a good, secure location, and it gave prisoners opportunities, if they so choose, to grab a weapon. Granted, they're handcuffed, but someone, if they can get their hands on a snow shovel, even behind their back, they can do some damage. So we also, just in front, at the front where the front of the police car would be, there was a cage, and that's where all our evidence was, just beyond the cage. Very unprofessional. And we also had a dog cage in there, all in a very small garage. So we had a big build out where everything is more secure. If we have any animals that come in that we have to hold until animal control is open, now they have climate controlled environment, nice holding facility. Our evidence room is all secure and separate from the prisoner areas. So now you drive into our cell block to either take on or release a prisoner, and you don't have those safety issues that we had before, and it's going to keep the prisoners and the officers safer. We also had a major reconstruction of the property around the station. We had major flooding in the basement for years, and we just tore out all the landscaping and redid all the landscaping around the building, and that was all drug forfeiture funds.
Awesome, thank you for that. My next question is a little bit more general. How does the St. Clair Shores police budget get drafted, reviewed, and passed by City Council, and how are residents able to be involved in that process?
As the chief, I prepare basically a wish list. This is what I would like to see in our upcoming budget. And I have several meetings with the assistant city manager and the city manager, and they'll go through and question me, do you really need this? Do you really need this? Why are your numbers here? And it's a really fine-tooth comb type process over several hours, and maybe I have to go back and do some revisions. Maybe I have to crunch some more numbers or come up with some more justification for the numbers that I have in there. And then city manager balances that with every other budget coming from every other department head in the city. And then there's a series of meetings in front of City Council where initially the budgets are presented, and then a couple of weeks later, during a period of time when we're able to give them some feedback on any questions or issues or concerns they may have, a couple of weeks later, they go ahead and approve the finalized budget. So it goes through many, many steps. I can't just write the check.
And so would the only way for residents to be involved in that process to be to provide commentary at the City Council meetings?
That's the formal way to do it, but I'm always open to suggestions.
They do have, there's budget hearings, special meetings with the City Council. They're usually, I want to say on a Saturday, they're another formal City Council meeting, right? And if you go, there's usually only about 3 people other than the City Council folks and maybe department heads in the room. But there's an opportunity there for residents to come and provide comment and also watch the decisions that are being made as well.
Awesome. My next question and last one is for you, Kevin. From your experience working with other representatives in the state of Michigan, Has there been any legislation brought up at the state level regarding police budgeting and operations and divestment from the police altogether to other forms of community safety?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of pieces of legislation that are being brought forward. Obviously, this is an issue prior to this year that many folks wanted to work on, and there's been a lot of attention given to it this year because of events that we've seen. And I'm appreciative of all the activists and folks from across our community, across the state and across the country that want to come together and move forward on these issues. And, you know, it'd be hard to touch on all of them because there's a multitude of different legislation. Our House Democratic Caucus, in conjunction with the Michigan Black Caucus, did put together a series of bills surrounding police training, reforms, and things like that. I do want to touch on one thing that I think is really important. And in fact, the call I was on with students from across our community today, we talked a lot about mental health services, social work services, counseling services within our schools specifically, because that was what we were discussing. But I think we have to focus on how, as a state, we are addressing the mental health needs, the needs of people across our community, whether that's drug addiction, which I believe is a mental health concern, and how do we best address those issues and provide resources. Here in Macomb County specifically, over the last 4 years, there have been millions of dollars in cuts because of Medicaid rebasing to community mental health. And Macomb County at one point had what I would say was the gold standard in the state of Michigan of providing mental health benefits to people that needed them in our community. Now, there was still work that needed to be done to improve on them, but if you look across the entire state, we had probably the best program in place. And a lot of that has been eroded because of these cuts that have come from the State Department of Health and Human Services. And I've worked with Republicans and Democrats in the House to return some of that money. We have some way to go, but the crux of the issue sometimes is when you cut things like mental health, that puts a burden on our police department because now they are dealing with a lot of those issues as well. And so we have got to find a way as a state and as a country to have real conversations about how we address needs across our communities. And mental health is always one of those things that we hear talked about a lot during election time and when folks want attention, but we don't hear real solutions to it all the time. And unfortunately, the solutions to it take resources. They take money across our communities. And so we have got to start investing in those things. But I really believe that if we get social workers, counselors back into our schools, if we get mental health services across our community, if we can work to address drug addiction across our communities, that we can do a lot to benefit our communities and actually take a lot of the issues that I've seen police in our community have to deal with that frankly isn't what it's not what they signed up to do, but it's fallen on them because of the lack of other resources in our community.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn it back
Can
over to Lawanda.
Evan, can I jump in there real quick?
Totally.
Just to echo what Representative Hertel mentioned regarding the mental health, this is the type of scenario we're having to deal with more often than I care to think about. But someone calls because they're having some type of emotional breakdown. They want to go get help. So they've called for help, but they tell us, I don't want to see the cops. If there's going to be cops, there's going to be issues, and they're just adamant they don't want to see the police. So dispatch tries to send a fire rig or an ambulance or MedStar, some type of medical first responder. They're not going to show up at a potential suicidal scene without the police. So now we're in a catch-22. They've called for help. They don't want the police, but the medical first responders won't go without the police. So it would be wonderful to have somebody within the county, social worker, counselor, that we could call on 24/7 to get that individual the help they need. Right now, our only option is take them to the hospital or not. And it's a shame.
Definitely. Lawanda, do you want to move on to your realm of questions about how our community can be involved to change things?
Yes, thank you, Evan. So my first question would be directed to the chief. Chief, you know, you've already covered the diversity or lack thereof that we have with the police department. But as residents and community members, how can we get involved to improve diversity and inclusion, whether that's from a volunteer standpoint or just anything that you can think of that would help you guys out in making sure we're more diverse and inclusive?
Well, number one, it's all about relationships. Like I mentioned before on another issue, it's all about relationships. There's nothing wrong with just coming into the station and saying hi, building those relationships. Anyone that wants to sit down, and I shouldn't say sit down, probably stand up and address one of our shifts just about something going on in the city, whether it's racial or other issues, just build those relationships. We have a briefing with every shift, every day. Right now with COVID, I probably don't want other people coming into the building, but once this breaks a little bit, let's come in, different community members, different lifestyles, different people that are different than me. Get in front, spend just 10, 15 minutes saying who I am, where I'm from, what's going on, and just sharing a different perspective. It's all about relationships. Beyond that, I think we need to advocate for some type of scholarship system where young men and women that can't afford to quit their job to go to the academy are going to be taken care of and can afford to do that. I think that's huge. I don't know if that would be a private issue. I don't know if that's something that Representative Hertel can work on, but some of these underprivileged people from underprivileged communities could make amazing police officers, but they can't because they can't get through that first hurdle. And I think somehow working with them, working with a way to get them the academy certification they need to take that next step would be huge.
I would be happy to look into working on that. I think there's benefit across the state for it. So I'll work with some of the organizations that I know of that might be interested in some legislators and see if we can get a group put together.
And I see Darnell Blackburn's listening in. He's a representative from MCOLS, the state licensing. He oversees all the academies. So I hope he's on and listening, and maybe the three of us can put our heads together and come up with a plan.
Awesome, awesome. That actually correlates with my next question, but I'll still just pose them. Rep Hertel, the next question is for you. Is there a program that can be implemented at a state level requiring communities to organize or collaborate with existing diversity or racial sensitivity task force to improve police and community relations?
Yeah, so there's nothing that I know of that exists today. You know, one of the steps that we did take in the Michigan House is to pass legislation to require that bias training. But I think, you know, what my previous employer before I served in this capacity, I was the department lead on a diversity and inclusion task force that, you know, continually had conversations about within that company what needed to happen for folks to either feel like we were being inclusive, what we needed to do to change things to make sure we had a diverse pool of candidates when going out to hire for new positions and things like that. So in fact, just in the Michigan legislature and the House Democratic Caucus this year, we started a diversity and inclusion initiative because we felt that even folks within our own caucus did not have some of the training or knowledge or background to really to understand folks that are coming from a different view. And I've always been a believer that, you know, obviously I don't have all the life experiences, but I need to learn from other people's life experiences, and especially in roles of elected officials, that's extremely important. So we started that program in the second quarter of this past year, moving it forward into our next term with our new members. And as a member of the leadership of the House Democratic Caucus, it's something that I've pushed forward to make sure we continue to do it. So we're continually having those conversations. It would make sense to look, these aren't, as I said before, a conversation you can have one time and then stop and move on. we have to continually be having these conversations in our community, and a platform to be able to do that, I'd be completely open to participating in, but looking at structures that will allow for that to occur as well.
Awesome. The next question is for you as well, Rep. Hertel. I know that you have your coffee hours, and perhaps you can advise us to when those will begin, and then also the dates and time for those coffee hours. But in particular, when we talk about improving police and community relations, how can you, as the state rep for residents in St. Clair Shores, actually get involved, and what role would you play in that?
So I think making sure we're having these conversations is important, right? And so after we saw over the summer, the death of George Floyd really brought a lot more attention to these issues, and those coffee hours that we had after that occurred were, I think, extremely important. We had people from all different backgrounds, and not everybody agreed. And unfortunately, these had to be virtual because of the pandemic. And I really do look forward to the time that we can get back to the face-to-face coffee hours. You know, traditionally, back in normal times, we had at least 3 a month. We would have one at the St. Clair Shores Senior Center. The third Monday of every month. We had a Saturday, the first Saturday of every month. It would rotate between East Point and St. Clair Shores, and we also had a happy hour in the evening for folks that couldn't make coffee hours. And so those were extremely valuable. You know, as we're in this virtual kind of world now, as we can't host large gatherings face to face. They've been more difficult, I'll be completely honest, and they're important still. And so we, in my office, are trying to get back to more meaningful conversations. In January, after the first of the year, we will release for next year our full schedule for the entire year of all of our coffee hours. They will have to be virtual in the beginning, but I'm hopeful as we get through the year that we'll be able to start meeting in person again. But I guess to the crux of the question, I firmly believe that I have to play a role in facilitating these conversations and make sure we're having them as a community, but also listening to people in those conversations and taking those concerns and turning them into real policy that will help change for the better. And it's not all going to happen at once. This stuff takes time, but you have to start somewhere with everything that you're willing to do. And so I've tried to listen this year, take some of those concerns to Lansing, have those conversations with my colleagues, not only in my caucus, but with the Republicans as well. And some of this takes convincing people that don't live any of these life experiences that things need to change. So that's part of the work that I do, and I'll continue to do that work. I look forward to getting back to some more of those conversations, and please participate. We have to have people in our community that are willing to stand up and talk about what's on their mind. Even, and I say this often, if we disagree, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking. It's actually more important that we have a conversation. And, you know, look, I come across people all the time that want to disagree just to disagree. And if that's where you're starting from, well, then we're going to have a tough time. But if you disagree with the intent to come together and actually work towards some common ground and find things that we can possibly agree on or move together on, those conversations become so important. And I've had many of them across the community in my time in office. Those are the conversations I try to focus on because that's where most of the work gets done.
Right, awesome. Thank you again for being here this evening, Kevin. We really appreciate your support in the efforts of changing and diversifying things.
Thank you for having me.
Chief Woodcox, this would be our final scripted question before we open everything up to audience participation. And it is a very sensitive question as well, but it is one that has been asked. And so we just felt it necessary to pose it in an open community fashion so that you had the opportunity to really address it so that people have a better understanding of what actually took place. But on July 4th of 2019, there was a shooting on St. Margaret Street that made local headlines. The incident resulted in multiple gunshot victims, including a woman in her 60s, a 12-year-old child, a murder of a St. Clair Shores resident, and a suicide. Some community members have questioned police response times, drawing parallels between another shooting that took place at Lakeland Manor in November of 2018, citing that multiple units were on scene within minutes and the response resulted in the death of Theo Gray. And K-9 officer asks, can you please explain what the tactics were in both scenarios and why they differed so greatly?
Oh, there's a lot of background there. I can speak in generalities. There is a lawsuit pending with the Theo Gray axe incident, so I can't speak specifically to that incident other than something that's already, I don't know if it's public record, but it's on the record with the court regarding response times. I don't know where the perception came that somehow maybe our people lollygag getting up to St. Margaret, or we're really charging hard to get to Lakeland Manor for that incident. But I can tell you from the dispatch logs, the amount of time it took for our officers to respond to Lakeland Manor was 1 minute, 34 seconds before our first officers were on scene. The St. Margaret incident on 4th of July, total time to respond 3 minutes and 31 seconds. Now, there are some things to consider here, such as when the initial call came out, there was no mention of anybody being shot, nobody seeing a gun. It was just basically a dispute at that point. And still, by the time we were dispatched, 3 minutes and 31 seconds. The location of the incidents are also playing a role in here. St. Margaret is the far western edge of the city. It's the very last street before you get into Roseville. It's also near the northern end of the community. And there's only one way in or two ways in, 13 Mile or Masonic. So it's not as easily accessible as Lakeland Manor, which almost at the heart of the city, right on Harper between 10 and 11 Mile. The odds that you're going to have a police car nearby and able to get there quickly are a lot higher. So as far as response times, I don't see, I mean, anytime there's an emergency, every second counts, but I don't see the difference in response times as a big red flag as far as how our officers chose to respond to those two incidents. Now, regarding tactics involved, it's very different to respond to a shooting that has occurred and you have victims that you need to tend to and the suspect has left. That's a very different scenario than someone frantically calling saying, oh my gosh, there's a guy out here waving a gun around and he's very mad and still on scene. So yeah, responses are going to be different to two different scenarios like that. If I respond to a shooting scene and the suspect is off in a house, my first goal is going to be to render aid to those individuals that have been shot. Subject in the house, yeah, still a threat, still dangerous, but we're not going hard charging into a house until we can actually get sufficient numbers to do it. Now, if there's a big event, a public event, and someone is there waving a gun around and they choose to take off running when the police officers arrive, the police officers don't know what this individual's intent is. They're going to give chase. And then, unfortunately, bad things happen. It would have been inappropriate for our officers to go charging into the house on St. Margaret. It would have been inappropriate for our officers just to let somebody run from the scene of a banquet hall after they've been waving a gun around. They're split-second decisions, and our officers did the best they could with the circumstances, and that's about the best I can say to that. There was not a response time issue, and there were two very different scenarios regarding the incidents that you asked. Is there anything else I can try to clarify for you?
No, that's awesome. I remember both events very vividly. The incident on St. Margaret, I was actually sitting at my kitchen table listening to it as it took place. Initially, I thought it was just fireworks going off, and when the police sirens began to ring out, I thought that maybe someone had maybe shot a firework into someone's home and you were responding to either a fire or maybe even someone being injured. I would not have imagined that there was some type of standoff that would have resulted in the death in a Shore resident, and just the trauma that the survivors are trying to work through. But it's definitely a question that was posed, and we thank you for answering it and just giving clarification on the different strategies that have to be used in the various scenarios. But that was the last pre-scripted question. We do have audience questions. I will render the floor back to Evan so that he is able to address maybe some of the questions that we have in the chat. And depending on how we're able to get through those questions, we may have to just have another session or just have you guys follow up via the questions through email or other fashions.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to briefly go through a few in the chat, and then if people would like to raise their hand, we can move on to those. I'm going to paraphrase / summarize a little bit because I think some of the questions can be kind of grouped together. There was a question about the starting pay for police officers. So I kind of want to ask, where can people find more information about the qualifications and compensation of police officers in St. Clair Shores? Is that like publicly available somewhere?
It's publicly available when we are going through a hiring process. I don't have the starting pay in front of me right now, but I believe the starting pay is mid-30,000s. And minimum qualifications, 2 years of college and academy certification under your belt, clean criminal record, at least 21 years of age. Off the top of my head, that's what I've got. But yeah, the 2 years of college and the academy, those are the speed bumps we're hitting.
Okay. And then that kind of leads us right into the next one. How much does the union place limitations on what you can do to hire?
Almost nothing. Regarding the hiring process, the unions have, I said almost nothing. It's actually nothing. It's all about Act 78, the state regulations regarding hiring and firing of police officers. So the unions play no role in that. They do have a say in some of the promotional processes going forward, but actual hiring and no, nothing.
And then can you give us a quick, it might be hard to be quick, but a quick rundown of kind of a step-by-step guide to becoming a police officer?
That's going to be dependent on the agency at which you'd like to work. I can speak most easily for St. Clair Shores. It's go get your associate's degree from an accredited college, keep your nose clean, and sign up for the academy and put yourself through the academy. There are agencies out there that will put you through, and if they're going to put you through the academy, you don't need the full 2 years of college. If you're sponsored by an agency, you can actually go to the academy without your 2 years of college. And I know in Macomb County Sheriff's Department, great place to start. You could hire in there as a jail guard, basically. And if you've proven yourself in there, they will then sponsor you through the academy to be certified to be a police officer, sheriff's deputy on the road. Anyone wanting to become a police officer that doesn't mind working in a jail, working for the Macomb County Sheriff's Department would be a great place to start.
Thank you. And then the next question, I don't know if you will know the actual percentage, but what percentage of the police budget or what percentage of the St. Clair Shores budget is allocated to the police? I did drop a link to the St. Clair Shores budget because I don't know if you'll know that percentage, but if you do, please share.
I don't know the percentage of the whole. I do know when I became chief, our budget was, we were pushing, I think about 15 million. Now we're down to about 11.5 million off the top of my head, maybe around 12 annually. But we are definitely the biggest draw on the city budget above all the other departments.
Thank you for that. The next question is, how can we balance attracting quality candidates while building diversity? We need both in our city. It has to go beyond more training and into changing the statistics of the department to reflect the community's demographics. We can all agree with that. But how can we balance attracting quality candidates while building diversity?
Well, we have to remove hurdles from people that that currently have hurdles in their way that may make great police officers, but they can't get there. And I've seen it in my career. There are some officers that would make outstanding supervisors, but for whatever reason, they can't pass a stinking test to become a supervisor. And I'm sure our entrance exam is a hurdle like that to some people that they may be the best people we'd want in a police car out there, but for whatever reason, you put a paper and a pencil in front of them and a written test, and it's brain freeze for some people. They could be very intelligent, very well read, very well educated, but they can't get over that hurdle. So I think we need to come up with a way to remove some of these hurdles, such as the academy and the cost, and some of these written exams that maybe they could be a little more forgiving. It's get hurdles out of the way so that good people can become cops.
Awesome. The next one is, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the "In God We Trust" on the back of police cars?
Absolutely. This was a conversation the mayor brought up, oh my goodness, probably 4 or 5 years ago. He saw an article where one of the police agencies down south had done that real big and emblazoned on the back of their car. And he's like, what do you think about that? And me being a Christian myself, I was fine with it, but I didn't want to make it in your face, and I didn't think that was the right time for something like that. But this has been a very, very difficult year for police officers, firefighters, residents, businesses. Everyone's struggling through this whole COVID thing. And I just put a little sticker, little reminder on the police cars that, you know what, there's something bigger than us out there. We're not out here alone. And it's our nation's motto, and it can mean to different people different things. To me, it means that God's got us and he's watching over us, but to other people it could mean a variety of things. And I figured, you know, it's the national motto. We're going through a national emergency. Let's put it on there.
Okay. And then switching back kind of to training, is there any sort of immigrant/cultural awareness training or inclusion of mental health crisis training?
Yes. As a matter of fact, the mental health crisis training we had last summer, not this most recent one, but would have been summer of 19. It's something that's trained in the academy, and we refresh or train on it about every other year. And then cultural awareness training, that's all included in our implicit bias training.
Awesome. And then I believe the answer is no, but I could be wrong. Is there a community oversight committee in St. Clair Shores to help guide the public safety department?
Not an independent one. I answer to the city manager. The city manager is my boss. So he reviews everything I do, and he reports to city council. So ultimately, city council, you could consider being an oversight committee, but outside of that, no, there's no other formal committee, standing committee or otherwise, for reviewing police functions.
Okay. And then moving on to the topic of forfeiture funds, are these obtained after a conviction or prior to a conviction?
They are seized at arrest, but then they are held until conviction. So if suppose you've got we had a Corvette not too long ago, a couple of years ago, that was seized, and we just hung on to it until the adjudication of the case. It would be unfair to sell off someone's property and then have, well, sorry, here, I wish we could give you your car back, but we can't, we already sold it. No, we'll seize it immediately, and then we'll wait for the case to go through before we dispose of any of the property.
Okay. And then our next question is about using these funds. Could some of the forfeiture fund monies be used for scholarships, cadet programs, et cetera, for police community outreach training?
That would be a lawyer question, because we wouldn't specifically be spending it on police training. It would be potentially going outside the agency. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I'm real careful with our spending of our forfeiture funds because we could lose it if we spend it improperly. I'd like to get a lawyer's opinion, whether to use something like that before I give you a firm answer. I'm guessing not, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Just for a check, can you check that normal to everyone else? Just a head nod. Okay, I did believe we got a little feedback. I wasn't exactly. With my computer.
Yeah, it was scary.
See if this. Okay, I think I'm feeding back too. I'm gonna mute Jaylen. Could you possibly move on to the last question and ask any of the audience questions? It may be my mic being feedback.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully I am not sounding similarly on my end. Okay, perfect. This is a question in which, another question regarding, I guess, accountability and trust. So the question with K9X, was it determined if the bullet that killed K9X was from a police gun or the person that was killed at the moment gun?
In my mind, that is settled, and there's no doubt, but I can't comment directly. There are competing theories, and both sides in this lawsuit have experts. One of them agrees with me, one of them disagrees with me. So is it clear-cut, solid answer? No, I can't say it's been determined, but I've seen the video, I've seen the evidence, I've seen all the angles. I know where the shot came from.
And then another question from the audience is, do St. Clair Shores police use body-worn cameras?
We have in-car cameras and body-worn microphones. I wouldn't be opposed to in-car cameras or body-worn cameras. They are very expensive. We've looked at them, and to outfit our agency with body-worn cameras just to get started, about $250,000. And that's not including all the ancillary costs that are as far as storage goes. I mean, if you've got 8 hours of video from every officer getting uploaded to a server somewhere, that gets ridiculously expensive. And then me, I'm a big privacy guy. I think we've got to tighten up some of the FOIA laws in the state, because right now, suppose, Jaylen, you call the police department because, oh my goodness, well, you hit grandpa over and he fell down, and well, the police and fire show up. Well, now I've got my camera as a police officer responding to your house, recording everything that's seen, everything that's heard. And you got that nosy neighbor next door that goes, you know what, I want to see what's going on in that house. And they file a FOIA request and they see everything that was going on in your house. I think there's got to be a way to protect the privacy of individuals. If I'm carrying a camera into your house, I don't want your neighbor to see all that footage. There's got to be a way to protect it. But right now, under the current FOIA laws, unless there's a crime that's going to be, the investigation of which is going to be hindered by holding back this video, I got to let it go. And it could be worse than that. There could be naked people. I got to give out the video. So I think there's some privacy issues that need to be addressed before I could fully get on board with my officers carrying body cams. But I'm absolutely in favor of them in theory. But I'd like to lock down some of the FOIA questions.
Thank you. And then another question is in regards to the situation in which you explained when folks are calling about a mental health issue, a lot of them are uncomfortable because of the men in blue. And, you know, police trust is something that we already have established was something that amps up anxiety for a lot of individuals, especially people of color. I'm curious to know, when you do have those situations and the police still have to be there, do you consider the police probably dressing up in plain clothing so that they are not having that anxiety because of the uniform?
That gets us into an interesting situation. if we were to do that, suppose we day shift, we've got detectives working, someone calls, hey, instead of sending a uniformed officer out there, let's send a detective out. Then we get into the situation of what if things go sideways? What if things go so horribly bad that all of a sudden now rounds are flying? Now you're going to say, well, how did we know that was really a police officer? They weren't wearing a uniform. They didn't have a police car. And I'm not saying you would say it. I'm just saying people reviewing the case. Yeah, I have my detectives dressed down a little bit, so they're a little less imposing when they're interviewing people. But I think when we're out in the public and we're taking some type of action like that, I think there has to be no doubt that it's really the police. And starting to send plainclothes people into the neighborhoods to take care of some of these issues, I think that can be dangerous.
Thank you for that. I think that is all the public comments. I think we got one more. Give me 1 second. Okay, so our next question is in regards to the 2 qualified candidates of African American descent that applied and was offered different jobs in the department. How come they both chose not to take the job? I think a lot of us are curious to know what are some key reasons why such a thing exists.
Well, the first one I was going to hire from the city of Detroit, and she never really gave us a solid answer as to why. I mean, why someone would jump through the hoops of taking the test, going through the interviews, then a chief's interview, just to say no. I can't explain it, but that was the choice she made. The candidate that we just recently offered a clerical job to, she was coming from another governmental agency in the county, and they heard she was leaving, and it's my understanding they sweetened the pot so they could keep her. So it was sort of a bidding war, I guess.
And then I'm gonna assume, Chief Woodcox, you all do allow applicants to, I guess, shadow, you would say, to see what the department is entailing and seeing what a day in the work of a police officer, entail. Because I think that's really key and important too when folks want to make a key decision with any job. They want to see what's happening inside of that occupation.
Yep, absolutely. We have people ride along all the time. Obviously, right now with COVID going on, we're not doing that. But we have college students riding along quite often. We have high school students at time, as long as they're 18. So yeah, it's great to get people out to see what it's like from our side of the police car.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass this along to Lawanda to close us out.
Thank you, Jaylen. I just appreciate everyone for coming out this evening. Obviously, this is the first of a series that we're going to be having, not only in St. Clair Shores, but in other communities. We're working diligently now to get things off the ground in East Point to have a conversation. And so with that, I did want to give individuals the opportunity to reach out to either the panelist or the host this evening. I don't know if Evan, if you still have the opportunity or the option of sharing the screen with the contact information. But this will be an ongoing discussion. I really felt it was important to not only protest over the summer, but actually have a conversation. Your protest is to let the powers that be know that there is a issue or a concern. But in order to address those issues and concerns, you must sit down and have a conversation. And so I just thank everyone for taking the time out to sit in and listen to the discussion. Again, this was live broadcasted on Facebook, and we also recorded it so that we are able to publicate it on Facebook again through the NAACP's website. If you want to contact Jaylen to get the link, then you can definitely do so. His email address is there on the screen, as well as the chief, our state rep, Kevin Hertel. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Evan, he is always a huge help as well. If anything you want to get organized or any questions you may have in the future for future events that we have, again, the next one is going to be in East Point, and we're looking at January 2021 with that. But with that, we will close things out for the evening. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for the work you do, Chief Woodcock. Thank you for the work that you do for us in Lansing, Kevin. And we are looking, doing great things in the future and to make some serious changes at the state level.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for hosting this.
Thank you. You guys have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Thank you.